He had a gun and he had pressed it into my breastplate. It made me freeze. Like they say, you fight or flight. I just froze. I plunged into a deep case of PTSD to the extent that I couldn't walk into a restaurant and just sit down. I felt aware of every door wherever I was because I was afraid someone was going to come through that door with a gun. Faith was what was keeping me alive.
Welcome to the Moms Grab Coffee podcast, where we build your trust in who God is by sharing stories of brokenness, hope, and faith. I'm your host, Hannah, and today we have my dear friend and small group church leader, Anna Lacy, on the show, and the conversation is so good. Her story is scary, gripping, revelatory, and a true testament of how God turns what the enemy meant for evil into something really, really good. She's a mom to 4 beautiful kiddos and a military wife. In addition to her story, she's going to give us some really practical things we can do right now to stay close to God. So grab your coffee and get ready to be encouraged. This is Anna's story. Thanks for joining the show, Anna. I'm so excited to have you today because you have a really incredible story to tell of how God pulled you out of a place of real physical, mental, and emotional fear. And I think it comes from a moment that not many of us have experienced in terms of fear, and God willing, will ever experience. So I wanted you to start by setting the stage for us. Take us to the moment before you were held up at gunpoint.
Yeah, so at that point in my life, I was a junior in college, and I pretty much thought that I was invincible. As I think most of us do. Like you said, we don't experience many moments in life that kind of take us to a place of fear. But I was a junior in college. I was 20 years old. I loved my life. It was very full. I was very busy. I was involved in campus ministry, and I worked at the study abroad office at school. I loved it. Everything was just great. And I was really growing in my faith. I felt like I was learning a lot about who Jesus was and doing Bible studies. And I trusted him for a lot of things, but had never been through anything much deeper than that. And then one night, I remember it was a Friday night, and I was coming home late at night to my mom's house where I lived in Baltimore. And our neighborhood wasn't in particularly dangerous. Nothing had really happened there before. But I parked and I was walking to my front porch, and I saw this man coming down the sidewalk, and no one ever tells you that how you know, but you just know, like, he's going to attack me. And I thought, like, let me just get to the front porch. It's light out. Like there's a light there that'll somehow maybe make me safe, but I didn't make it. And he spun me around and held me at gunpoint. And, it was a pretty typical mugging as far as I think anyone would expect from that kind of thing. Like, it was a crime of opportunity. He wanted money. I was distracted and had like 18 bags with me for different activities and couldn't remember where my money was. It was just, it was awkward, and it was uncomfortable, and, that he had a gun and he had pressed it into my breastplate, and that just, it made me freeze. Like they say, you fight or flight. I just froze. And then once the actual interaction was over, he pushed me onto my front porch, and he told me to drop all my bags, and he grabbed them and ran, and I was on the front porch. But police came, detectives came. It was a lot.
What was going through your mind at that moment?
Oh gosh, Hannah, that's the funny part. I wish nothing had been going through my mind, but it was quite the opposite. I was running through. I had seen this video of someone in Rwanda who was held up, and they shared the gospel with their attackers. And, oh, Jesus, am I supposed to do that right now? I don't know if I'm ready to do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't know where my money is. He wants money. Like, I don't even know if I have any. If I leave him this bag, I have brand new tennis shoes in it. It's a gym bag. Will he take those? It was like so many things all at once. And it all happens within a split, minute, maybe 90 seconds. before I think he got frustrated with me because I wasn't just like, oh, here's my wallet. Like, actually, I don't know what bag it's in. And then I actually looked away from him and I just yelled, Jesus, help me, as loud as I could. And thinking back, maybe he thought someone would come outside because I was loud, but I really believe that it was just a point where the tension broke. And he said, drop your bags. I'm going to push you on the porch. And I was like, okay, like that'll work. Because I need out of this right now. Like I was just, and I think, your body freezes, but as soon as I got inside the house, because of course in those days, nobody locked their door. So I just went inside and I landed on the foyer floor and just like all of a sudden, all of then the emotion comes over you and I started just shaking and like screaming, but not quite. It was more like a cry, but just shaking because it just was, so abrupt and so difficult.
My gosh. Yeah. What did your relationship with God look like at that point?
Well, at that point, I feel like I had a really, maybe a first love relationship with God that was really beautiful. Like I felt like I loved pressing into who God was, and I loved Bible stuff. I just loved everything about God. I was kind of a new Christian. I'd known God and believed in Jesus for about I was 17 when I met him. I was 23 years. So I hadn't gotten very far into things that are difficult in life, but I had learned that I loved him. And so that was really good, but this was definitely like a stressor. This was definitely a point where I think a lot of people could have said, well, this happened, so this like Christianity may not work for me through this. But for me, this situation forced me to cling with all that I had to who he was, because I didn't have any other choice.
Yeah. Walk us through that. What does that actually mean when you say cling to Jesus? Because after that kind of event where you're almost like met with death, right? There's so many different ways you could cope. There's so many different ways you could just fall apart. But your instinct was to cling to Jesus. So what did that look like?
Sure. Well, I plunged into a deep case of PTSD. So to the extent that I couldn't walk into a restaurant and just sit down. I felt aware of every door, mainly door. I felt aware of every door wherever I was because I was afraid someone was going to come through that door with a gun. I remember I was walking through my college campus and the gentleman in front of me to get into a building held the door open for me and turned around and looked at me, and I almost dropped to the floor. Like just things like that. Like I was just not functioning in any way. I was afraid of everything. I was hyper vigilant. Like the tension in my body was intense at all times. And so I had never dealt with anything mentally like that before. I did describe what I was going through to friends, and, most people at that age especially have no idea what they're supposed to say or how they're supposed to help. Some people were really naive and said things like, you need more faith. But faith was what was like keeping me alive, was knowing that, or honestly from like moving to Alaska and hiding in a box or like harming myself, because it was like, I know God's there. I know he's there, and I know he loves me. I know that. And so I need him. So I felt like I was clinging to him in this deep sense of need every day. It was like, I can't get from this building, from this class to the next class, because walking through this campus, I feel jumpy at every second. What did that look like practically? I mean, besides me, I felt like I was talking to him all the time, because it was like, okay, I have to get from my car to this store or into this person's house. Like walking from between those places was so difficult for me. It was like I was talking to him all the time. Kind of like, okay, we're going to do this. And then I would listen to worship music anytime I could. I would, back when everyone had, was it an iPod?
Yeah, iPod.
Right? I'm like,
It sounds like a foreign term.
Yeah. So I would put worship music on my iPod and I would listen to it all the time because that would help to focus me on like, we're going to trust God with this today. Because, it was a point where I had never had to trust him with my physical security. And so, I was doing that in every way that I knew how. And I would lay in bed and I would beg for healing. I would beg for help. Like, I need help. There was a verse that I read. It was like, this I need to believe is true because I needed sleep. Some people going through something like that, they say that there's always a safe place. And safe, I needed my bed to be safe in order to like make it through life. And so I would cling to a verse in Psalm 4:8. It says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." And I would say that all the time because it was like, okay, if I'm going to make it through tomorrow, I need to sleep tonight. And so my bed was safe. And so, the word helped in that way. It was all very new for me and it was very vulnerable. I clung to Jesus and I needed friends because I had to go up to someone and say, hey, we had this Bible study tonight. Would you mind driving home behind me, like following me home and making sure I get from my car to the front door? Or, my sister lived there too. Could you stay up and watch out the window and make sure I get inside? Or can you walk me here? Could you walk me to this class? Oh, you have a class from this building and going in the same direction. Like, can you go with me? Because I just need somebody else there. And that I had never been that needy to anyone before. And so having to be honest with that was big.
And having that courage too. To ask people to do that.
Yeah, that was hard. That was really hard because I was always the one who, in my mind, had it together, right? Mm-hmm. But having to say, I need this.
Yeah, and those are such simple things, but those simple things can be so hard to put on people. Like, just walk me from class to class, It's like, sure, but I think a lot of times we tend to overanalyze things. We're like, oh, well, I don't want to ask. I don't want to bother them. But I love that you leaned into the people around you to help you through it.
Yeah, I really had to because otherwise I don't know what I would have literally cowered in a corner somewhere. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh gosh, I have to go. So it was rough. But I did also, I did find some trauma therapy that was professional. And they did an electromagnetic therapy. Where they tried to help you process through memories. And it was used a lot on like veterans and people who had been in war and had PTSD from that type of scenario. And that did help. I noticed that it helped me not quite be as tense, but it was almost as if my arms were just stronger to carry the burden, if that makes sense. It was still there. But I was a little bit better at recognizing what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love a couple of things that you said. So one is that you were constantly talking to God and that you were constantly having conversations with him throughout the day, at night. I love that because he does walk alongside you, right? And sometimes I think we can compartmentalize God into, okay, well, I have to pray. Right? And I have to have my prayer time, like that's separate, or my quiet time, that's separate. That's a defined period. But to think of him as someone you're talking to throughout, even from going from class to class, point A to point B, you can talk to him as if he's your friend.
Yeah. Like that circumstance did kind of shine a light on like the relationship I had with God and drove it deeper, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. How long did it take, like all of these conversations, all of these things that you were doing to cope and get through? What was that time period like?
Well, that does go into what kind of lifted all this away from me. But it was about a year that I was in significant traumatic stress, like where it affected me every day. It affected me every moment. And it definitely changed my life. And there, we met with a detective who was working on the follow-up of the crime. And, I asked him, I said, did this ever go away? I said, I'm really anxious. Does this ever leave? And he said, no, sorry. And so it was one of these God, I need you, because I'm being told by someone who does this all the time that this is going to be forever. And I'm only 20 years old. So yeah, it was a year before anything really changed.
Wow. And in that year, it sounds like the key was consistency. So leaning on your community, having conversations with God, always listening to worship music, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I mean, what brought a big change to me as I did those things, was I felt like God was calling me to go study abroad in Africa. And I was very scared because violent crime there is a hobby. Like, everybody there has been mugged or held up or, kidnapped or carjacked or whatever. It's normal. And I knew that. And I was like, I do not want to go there because I don't know what will happen to me if this happens again. Like, I know how hard this was one time. I don't know if I can do it again. But I felt like I was supposed to go. It's another story, but very clearly that I was supposed to go study abroad there. So I did. And part of what I really wanted to share is that, like, you just keep going with the next step. Like, he's always inviting us into something that's next. And it was like, I needed to keep going with that. It was either leave Christianity completely because it wasn't like I wasn't healed yet, or keep going into what I felt he was saying. And so I did. I went there and I was absolutely terrified, but, I got involved with a church there, and they had a student retreat where they invited participants to be baptized in the ocean and filled with the Holy Spirit. And I had always wanted to be baptized in water, and this was my chance. And so I said yes, and it was absolutely beautiful. But what was even more powerful was a few days later, I all of a sudden realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm not afraid. Like, it was gone, completely gone. After I was baptized. And so it was earth-shattering to me that I could go from knowing that I was obeying God, but still suffering, still jumpy, still aware of where everything was, still afraid to sit in the corner of a room or, be in public, to feeling like I was back to normal. Like, I wasn't worried about every person I saw. I wasn't suspecting people of pulling out guns all day long. It lifted off. And that was miraculous for me.
I love that. That just gave me chills. I just love how God prepared you for that calling in South Africa. And then it all ended with baptism. I think that's so incredible.
Yeah, I spoke to some leaders afterwards, and I was like, I had PTSD before this. And it was just really funny because they were like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, baptism, it's really powerful. You're identifying with Christ's death and resurrection, and you are declaring to the spiritual world that you are in Christ. Like, it's powerful.
Amazing.
And so then the spiritual world gets off you.
Mm-hmm.
It was like all that, they were like, it told that demon, they're like, that was a spirit of fear that you were under. And baptism shook it off. And to see that in such a clear spiritual term, like, because I think everything that I had gone through up until that point was just like, oh, it's my fault. My brain's not working. This event, I couldn't get through this event. And then for someone to say, no, that was a spiritual attack. Like, yes, it jarred your brain, but there was a spirit of fear that was over your life because of it. And walking in obedience to be baptized shook it off. And I don't have any other explanation for it that makes sense, but it was an eye-opening testimony just to see that that's a very real thing, but so much more so what God can do at the end of the day.
Yeah, so it wasn't you didn't have to reach inside you, because I think a lot of times that's what the world tells us, right? Like, reach inside you and, you'll overcome whatever you're facing. That's not the case.
Yeah, I couldn't have fixed it. No.
So I want to go back to one part of your story. You said you could choose to continue to look towards God to help you heal from this really scary and traumatic event, or you could not. So what kept pushing you towards leading into God and staying there?
Well, I think it was just the confidence I had in knowing that he had saved me in the beginning. That I had this new relationship with him and knowing that he was real, knowing that he is a father, knowing that he is in control, knowing that he loves me and that he gave his life for me. And I was stuck in that in the best of ways, like knowing fully and completely that I had gone before in my life of not knowing him, not doing things his way, having no interest in him whatsoever, to when you come to the point of salvation and knowing like, oh my gosh, this is real, to being like, well, then like, this is what I've got, like in the best way. Like I am his now. And so I am his problem now. And,
I love that.
Like this, in those years leading up to that, like he was my best friend. And so that relationship was very much developed. So it is interesting that like, as we develop that relationship with God, it gets tested in times that are tough. And so I'm thankful for all that had happened prior, all of the Bible study, all of the community, all of the kind of just doing the nitty gritty ABC of a Christian walk. And I showed up to everything because I was just excited to know Jesus. I showed up to every Bible study. I was that person that was just always there because I just wanted to grow. And I was so happy to be a Christian. I was so happy to be his that I don't think I knew it, but so much was pouring into me that then when this happened, it was like, he's all I've got. And I know he's the only one that can fix it. So I'm going to hang out here until he fixes it.
And a whole year.
Yeah.
That's a long time to live with that. But to have that unshakable, foundation that eventually not only got you through it, but more, right? Taking you to South Africa, being baptized to where you are today.
Yeah. And I really learned that this experience helped me see not just that he saved me and he loves me, but that he's very powerful. When I tell people this story, it's like, I'm not upset that it happened. I don't want to go through it again, thanks. But I'm not upset that it happened because I learned that he can deliver. I learned that there are spiritual battles that we face and that he is bigger than them. And I learned that firsthand. And so I'm not sad for that knowledge. Because it's not something, I don't just know it because I read it somewhere. Like I know it because it happened. Because I don't struggle with that anymore. There are times that, my husband or my dad's like, didn't you think about that? Like, didn't you go through some experience and now you made this decision that maybe you should think about these things still. And I just, I don't. But yeah, it's just that the Lord, that he delivers. And I know that for sure. You can't it's not an intellectual argument for me. Yeah. So that was wonderful. And I mean, I think the other thing is I love when people get baptized. I feel like there's that moment where someone comes out of the water and I just yell and scream and hoot and holler. And it's like, this is so exciting because I don't know what's happening exactly in their walk, but I know how wonderful it is to declare to all of heaven and earth that you are in Christ. And that's a very powerful, and beautiful place to be. And so I get really excited about that.
Yeah. So let me ask you, had it not happened, where do you think you'd be today?
I think my trust would not be quite as developed because going through that, and seeing, I came through the other side of it because he brought me through the other side of it, knowing that he saw, every day of it. I trust him. And I think without that, my trust in who he is and what he says, I'm sure would not have, he may have deepened it another way, but it would have stayed at a very elementary level. Based on a lot of emotion, but not a lot of experience. And so
And as a mom now with 4 kids, it's almost like the stakes are higher, right? Because now it's not just you, it's your kids.
Yeah, and it's trusting, like I know that I can trust them into his hands for their security and their protection, or if they're going through something, that he sees it. You know, like I know he sees it because he saw my struggle.
Yeah, and what a testimony for your kids too.
Yeah, I've told them tiny bits, but my oldest is 7, so they get really little pieces of that story.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, the age-appropriate version, right?
Right. Yeah, Mom, there's been bad guys. There's been bad guys, but Jesus kept me safe.
Yeah, right. Oh, yes. Awesome. Well, I want to ask you one last question. For moms who are struggling, and, you know, again, God willing, hopefully not with the same kind of experience, but with fear, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, you know, tough relationships, that kind of thing. What do you want them to know, and what can they do to pull themselves out of that fear?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, as you said, there's different kinds of fear, but I think the 2 things that are really important are, one is just to remember that God sees you. I lived in this for a year, and it was very heavy and it's very real, and I in no way would ever try to diminish the validity of that experience for someone. But that God sees, and that to walk away from him just because it's not fixed yet, like don't do that. Don't give up. Like he has a plan, and it's going to be amazing if you hang in there with him. But the other thing that is equally important is I feel like each of us have that next step of obedience that we're called to do. If you need to be baptized, do it. If you've wandered away from church, go back. If you need to be in a small group or a community, or you do need to be in a small group or a community, get in one. Do it. Don't wait. Don't say like, oh, I'll do that next year, or, oh, once this happens, or especially for moms, once the kids are sleeping through the night, or once my schedule is freer. It's like these things are life-giving, and we need them now. Like we need to be doing and walking in those ways now. Like God's not asking us to, as especially busy moms, to like be in 5 different groups and leading 8 different things. It's like, no, just do the things that really matter and do them now. Don't put them off.
Fantastic advice.
Easier said than done. I know. But,
certainly.
But worth
especially
it.
With kids.
Yes.
And
yes.
Mom life and all of that.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I had a pastor once say that if you're in crisis, do the next right thing. That sounds like Frozen. It was before Frozen. Yeah. But like they said, when you're in crisis, do the right thing. Like do the basics and stick to those. Go to small group, read your Bible, worship, be in church. Do those things because those are the things that will help you get through what you're going through.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much, Anna. I love hearing your testimony, and there's so many other pieces to it, so I really want to make sure we bring you back, but I always feel so inspired. It's incredible. I think it's just a true demonstration of who God is, and that can be forgotten, right? I forget sometimes. Like I know in my brain who God is, but in my heart, right? Really embracing that God is hope and he's your peace and he will restore you. Read it in the Bible. My brain knows, but when I hear stories like yours where it's clearly demonstrated, it really gets me excited. So thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting for me even to go back through it because it was so long ago. I was like, oh yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
It's encouraging for me too. So thanks for the opportunity.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that story and that it was really encouraging for you. Before we end the episode today, I want to leave you with a few reminders. First and foremost, God sees you. He can deliver. So if you're struggling today, hang in there with him. Do the next right thing in obedience and do it consistently. It could mean going back to church, joining a small group, maybe even leading one, reading the Bible, or maybe it's taking a step of faith into the unknown. We've got a lot of unintentional Frozen references today, but that aside, whatever that thing is, do it now and don't delay. And if you don't know what that thing is, pray about it. Ask God for some answers. And if this story touched your heart, we'd love it if you'd take a minute to leave us a 5-star rating so we can reach more moms. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks so much, ladies. I'm your host, Hannah, and I can't wait to grab coffee again next time.